A decorated detective. Handcuffed on his own street. His badge called fake. His dignity stripped under flashing lights, while a teenager's camera captured every second. This is the night Miles Crawford's world shattered, not by criminals, but by the very system he'd sworn to serve. What happened next exposed a corruption so deep it would shake an entire city to its core. Stay with me until the end of this story and drop your city in the comments so I can see how far truth travels. The autumn rain had finally stopped, leaving Boston's streets slick and reflective under the amber glow of streetlights. Detective Miles Crawford's unmarked sedan glided through the quiet neighborhood of Beacon Hill, the kind of area where old money whispered through brownstone facades and perfectly manicured hedges. At 11:47 p.m., the streets were nearly empty, just the way Miles liked it, after a 16-hour shift. His shoulders ached, his eyes burned. But there was something else too, a quiet satisfaction that came with closing cases. Tonight he'd secured a confession in a homicide that had gone cold for 8 months. A mother would finally have answers about her son. That had to count for something. Miles loosened his tie with one hand, keeping the other steady on the wheel. The radio hummed low jazz, the kind his father used to play on Sunday mornings. Miles was 38, but tonight he felt every single year, plus a few extra. His reflection in the rearview mirror showed a man who desperately needed sleep. Close-cropped hair, neatly trimmed beard, starting to show gray, and eyes that had seen too much. "Almost home," he muttered to himself, thinking of Aisha. His wife would probably be asleep by now, curled up with case files scattered across her side of the bed. She was a civil rights attorney, the kind who brought work home, not because she had to, but because she couldn't turn off her need to fight for people. They were a good match that way, both believers in a system they were constantly trying to fix. 3 blocks from his house, Miles noticed the headlights in his rearview mirror. A police cruiser riding close. Probably just patrol, he thought. Nothing unusual. Beacon Hill had regular patrols. Residents here demanded it paid taxes that insured it. But the cruiser didn't pass, didn't turn. Just stayed there, matching his speed, staying close enough that Miles could see 2 silhouettes in the front seat. Miles's jaw tightened slightly. He knew this feeling, had known it since he was 16 years old, driving his mother's car home from basketball practice. That hyper-awareness that crept up your spine when you realized you were being watched, assessed, judged. He was a detective now, carried a badge, had 17 years on the force. But in this moment in the rearview mirror, he was just another black man driving through a white neighborhood at night. "Don't jump to conclusions," he told himself. "They're just doing their job." Then came the lights, red and blue splitting the darkness. Miles felt his heart rate spike even as his training kicked in. He activated his turn signal, carefully pulled to the curb and put the car in park. Hands on the wheel. 10 and 2. Visible. Non-threatening. The protocol he'd followed his entire driving life, the same protocol he'd taught his nephew last summer when the kid got his license. Stay calm, be respectful, get home safe. That was the mantra. In his side mirror, Miles watched a young officer emerge from the cruiser. Mid-20s maybe. Blonde hair, clean cut, moving with that particular combination of caution and authority that came with being new to the job. The officer's hand rested on his service weapon as he approached a detail that made Miles's stomach tighten. The officer's flashlight beam hit Miles's face, and he had to resist the urge to shield his eyes. "Evening, officer," Miles said, his voice calm and measured. "Is there a problem?" "License and registration," the officer said. No greeting, no explanation. Just a command delivered in a tone that expected immediate compliance. "Absolutely," Miles replied. "They're in my glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now, okay?" Slowly. Miles moved with deliberate care, keeping his movements visible and predictable. He retrieved his wallet and registration, handing them over through the open window. The officer, his nameplate read. Reynolds studied the documents with his flashlight, his eyes flicking between the license photo and Miles's face. "Detective Miles Crawford." Reynolds read aloud, his tone flat. "Boston PD." "That's right," Miles said, allowing himself a small measure of relief. This would be over soon. Professional courtesy. A quick apology for the mistake, maybe a conversation about the case he'd just closed. That's how it worked when cops pulled over cops. But Reynolds didn't hand the documents back. Instead, he straightened up his hand, still on his weapon. "Step out of the vehicle, please." Miles blinked. "Excuse me. I need you to step out of the vehicle, now." "Officer Reynolds, I'm on the job. I just showed you my—" "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Step out of the vehicle." The word "sir" landed like a slap. Miles had been on the force long enough to know that tone, that particular emphasis. It wasn't respectful. It was a warning. "Can you tell me what this is about?" Miles asked, working hard to keep his voice steady. "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for. Now step out of the car, or I'll remove you myself." Miles felt the world tilt slightly. A suspect. He was a decorated detective. 3 commendations, 17 years of service, driving 3 blocks from his own house, and he was being treated like a suspect. "Officer, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Out. Now." The second officer had emerged from the cruiser, now an older man with a thick mustache and a hand on his own weapon. 2 guns pointed in his direction, even if they weren't drawn. 2 officers treating him like a threat. Miles made a decision. He would comply. He would be the bigger person. He would follow every instruction to the letter, and then tomorrow he would make a call to the captain and this would get sorted out. That's how the system worked. That's what he'd always believed. He opened the door slowly and stepped out. Hands visible, movements careful. "Hands on the vehicle," Reynolds ordered. Miles placed his palms on the cool metal of his car's roof. The street was quiet, except for the crackle of the police radio and the distant sound of traffic on Beacon Street. Somewhere a dog barked. A light came on in a second-floor window across the street. Reynolds patted him down, rough, impersonal, the kind of search that was meant to intimidate as much as investigate. Miles felt hands move over his jacket, his waist, his ankles. He stared at his own reflection in the car window and barely recognized the man looking back. "He's clean," Reynolds called to his partner. "Officer, I need to reach for my badge," Miles said carefully. "It's in my jacket pocket. My shield. I'm a detective with—" "Don't move," Reynolds snapped. "I'm trying to show you my credentials. If you'll just let me—" "I said don't move." And then came the words that would replay in Miles's mind for months afterward. "Turn around. Hands behind your back. You're making a mistake." Miles said, his voice finally cracking slightly. "I'm a detective. My badge is right there. Just look at it. Please. Turn around." Miles turned, and for the first time he saw them. A cluster of neighbors had emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion. An elderly white woman in a bathrobe stood on her steps, hand over her mouth. A middle-aged man recorded on his phone, and there was a teenage Asian kid, maybe 16, standing at the edge of his lawn, with his phone held high, the screen glowing. The kid was live streaming. Miles wanted to tell him to stop, that this wasn't what it looked like, that this was just a misunderstanding that would be cleared up. But before he could speak, he felt the cold bite of metal around his wrists. Handcuffs. He was being handcuffed. "Officer Reynolds, this is a serious mistake," Miles said, working desperately to keep his composure. "I am Detective Miles Crawford, badge number 4721 out of the 3rd District. Call it in. Call Captain Washington. He'll verify." "Save it," Reynolds said, clicking the cuffs tight, just a fraction tighter than necessary. "We've heard every story. You probably bought that badge online." The words hit Miles like a physical blow. Bought the badge online. 17 years. 17 years of service, of putting his life on the line, of missing birthdays and anniversaries, and his father's final days, because he was working a case. And this kid, this officer who probably hadn't been on the force for more than 2 years, thought he'd bought his badge online. "Check the system," Miles said, his voice hard now. "Run my name. You'll see. We'll sort it all out at the station. the older officer said, approaching for the first time. His tone was slightly less hostile, but no less firm. "If you're who you say you are, you'll be home in an hour." An hour. An hour of sitting in handcuffs, of being processed like a criminal, of having his name run through systems that would flag this arrest even if it was later dismissed for the rest of his career. An hour that the teenager's live stream would turn into eternity, spreading across social media, across the city, across the country. Miles looked at the kid with the phone. Their eyes met for just a second, and Miles saw something there. Not excitement or schadenfreude, but something like recognition. Like the kid understood exactly what was happening and why it mattered. "Are you recording this?" Reynolds noticed the teenager, suddenly his voice sharp. "This is police business. Put that phone away." "I'm on public property," the kid said, his voice young but steady. "I have the right to record. I'll give you to the count of 3. Tyler." A man's voice called from the house behind the teenager. "Tyler, get inside, now." The kid. Tyler hesitated for just a moment, then called back. "Dad, they've got him in handcuffs. He's a detective." He showed them his "inside, now." But Tyler didn't move. His phone stayed up, camera rolling, bearing witness. Miles was guided, pushed really toward the police cruiser. The handcuffs dug into his wrists. His own car sat empty at the curb door, still open, interior light casting a soft glow on the empty driver's seat. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably Aisha wondering where he was. "Watch your head," the older officer said, not unkindly, as Miles was placed in the back of the cruiser. The door slammed shut, and suddenly Miles was in a cage. He'd sat in the back of police cruisers before, during training, during ride-alongs, when he was a rookie, even during a practical joke at his partner's retirement party. But he'd never sat here like this. Never as the suspect. Never as the threat. Through the window, he could see Reynolds approaching Tyler. The kid was backing up now, still recording his father emerging from the house in a bathrobe, protective arm extended toward his son. "Sir, I need you to put the phone away," Reynolds was saying. "I'm Dr. James Chen." The man said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet night. "This is my property and my son has every right to record. Now I suggest you tell me why you have an unarmed man in handcuffs on my street." Reynolds's jaw tightened. "Police matter, not your concern." "It became my concern when you brought it to my neighborhood," Dr. Chen replied. "What's the charge?" He matched a suspect description. "What suspect? What crime?" Reynolds didn't answer. Instead, he turned and walked back toward the cruiser, muttering something into his radio that Miles couldn't quite hear. In the back seat, Miles closed his eyes and tried to breathe. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Tomorrow he'd walk into the precinct, and this would be a story, an anecdote about an overzealous rookie. The department would apologize. Reynolds would get a talking to about professional courtesy. Everything would go back to normal. But even as he thought it, Miles knew better. He'd seen the phone cameras. He'd seen the live stream. And he knew how these things worked now in 2024, when a single video could go viral in minutes. This wasn't going to stay quiet. This wasn't going to be handled internally. The cruiser's engine started. Through the window, Miles watched his own car receding in the distance, watched the neighbors watching him, watched Tyler Chen still holding that phone high, even as his father tried to pull him inside. And Miles realized something that made his stomach turn to ice, that kid's livestream might be the only thing that saved him. Without it, this would be his word against 2 officers. A black detective claiming he'd been racially profiled by his own department. Even with his badge, even with his record, it would come down to credibility. And the system protected its own. Miles had seen it happen 100 times from the other side. But now he was on this side, and everything looked different from here. The cruiser pulled away from the curb. Through the rear window, Miles watched his neighborhood disappear, watched Tyler's phone camera follow them until they turned the corner. The last thing he saw was the kid lowering his phone and saying something to his father, something that looked like, "I got it all." Reynolds glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You got anything you want to say?" Miles met his eyes and said the only thing that mattered anymore: "I want a lawyer." Because somewhere between the traffic stop and the back of this cruiser, something fundamental had shifted. Miles Crawford wasn't a detective anymore. He was a black man in handcuffs, and all his years of service, all his commendations, all his belief in the system had just evaporated into the cold October night. The city lights blurred past the window. Somewhere out there, a video was already spreading across the internet. Somewhere out there, Aisha was probably just seeing her phone light up with notifications. Somewhere out there, this night was becoming something bigger than one man, one stop, one mistake. Miles didn't know it yet, but Tyler Chen's livestream had already been shared 10,000 times. By morning, it would be 100,000. By the end of the week, the whole country would know his name. But right now, in the back of that police cruiser, all Miles Crawford knew was the bite of handcuffs on his wrists and the crushing weight of a system he'd spent 17 years believing in, turning its back on him when he needed it most. The city had never looked so cold. The fluorescent lights of the 3rd District station burned Miles's eyes as he sat in an interrogation room, a room he'd sat in hundreds of times before, but never on this side of the table. The handcuffs had been removed 20 minutes ago, leaving angry red marks around his wrists. Across from him sat Sergeant Dale Morrison, a 20-year veteran with salt and pepper hair and eyes that wouldn't quite meet Miles's. "Look, Crawford," Morrison said, shuffling papers that didn't need shuffling. "This is just procedure. You understand that, right? We have to process." "Process what exactly?" Miles's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. "I showed him my license. I told him I was on the job. I offered to show him my badge. What part of that required handcuffs?" Morrison sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Reynolds says you were acting suspicious. Says you matched a description we had for—" "What description?" Miles leaned forward. "What suspect?" "What crime? I want specifics, Dale, right now." The door opened before Morrison could answer. Captain Marcus Washington filled the doorway, his broad shoulders and 6'3" frame commanding immediate attention. He was 52, one of only 3 black captains in the Boston PD, and he'd been Miles's commanding officer for the past 6 years. His face was carved from stone. "Out," Washington said to Morrison. "Cap, I was just out. Now." Morrison gathered his papers and left, closing the door behind him. Washington stood there for a long moment, just looking at Miles. Then he pulled out the chair Morrison had vacated and sat down heavily. "You okay?" he asked. Miles almost laughed. "Do I look okay? You look like a man who just spent 45 minutes in the back of a cruiser and another 20 getting processed like a suspect." Washington's jaw tightened. "I've already had words with Reynolds. He's new. He's got a problem with authority, with reading, with basic human decency." Miles heard his voice rising and forced himself to take a breath. "Marcus, I showed him everything. I did everything right. And he still put me in cuffs." "I know." "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like business as usual. Black man in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time, and it doesn't matter if he's got a badge or not." Washington was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, almost gentle. "Aisha's on her way. She's already making calls. And Miles the kid recorded everything." Miles closed his eyes. "I know. It's already online, 50,000 views and climbing." "I know. This isn't going to stay quiet." "I know." The silence stretched between them, filled with 17 years of shared history, the cases they'd worked together, the promotions Washington had pushed for Miles, the late nights when they'd both chosen the job over their families because somebody had to speak for the dead. But underneath all of that was something else now, something neither of them wanted to name, but both could feel the realization that the system they'd devoted their lives to had just shown its true face. Washington stood up. "Go home. I'll handle the paperwork." This will be listed as a mistaken identity resolved on scene. You were never formally arrested. That's not what happened. I know, but that's what the paperwork will say. Miles looked up at his captain, this man he'd respected for years. And Reynolds? He'll get a talking to. Probably some mandatory retraining on professional courtesy. A talking to? Miles repeated flatly. He handcuffed a fellow officer for no reason, called my badge fake, and he gets a talking to. Washington's face hardened. What do you want me to do? Miles throw the book at a rookie for being overzealous. The Union would protect him, like they always do. Miles stood up his chair, scraping against the linoleum. I'm going home, Marcus, but this conversation isn't over. He walked out of the interrogation room and through the station, aware of every eye on him. Cops he'd worked with for years suddenly found their desks fascinating. The desk sergeant studied his computer screen like it held the secrets of the universe. Only Officer Jenny Martinez met his eyes, giving him a small nod that might have been sympathy or solidarity or both. The night air hit him like a slap. His car had been brought to the station, someone's idea of a courtesy, and sat in the visitor lot like an accusation. Miles stood there for a moment, keys in hand, trying to remember how to breathe normally. His phone buzzed. 16 missed calls from Aisha, 43 text messages, 12 voicemails, and notifications, hundreds of them from social media platforms he barely used, news alerts, message requests from reporters. The video. It was everywhere. Miles unlocked his phone with shaking hands and found the live stream. Tyler Chen's account had exploded. The video now had over 200,000 views and was still climbing. The comments section was a war zone of outrage and support, racism and solidarity. But the video itself was damning in its clarity. There was Miles' calm and professional hands visible, explaining who he was. There was Reynolds' hand on his weapon, ordering him out of the car. There was the moment Miles tried to show his badge, and Reynolds called it fake. And there was the moment the handcuffs went on, while Miles said clear as day, I am Detective Miles Crawford, badge number 4721. Miles watched himself disappear into the back of the cruiser, watched Tyler's camera follow until they turned the corner. The video ended with Tyler saying to his father, Dad, they just arrested a cop for being black. I got it all. A car pulled into the lot, tires screeching slightly. Aisha. She was out of the driver's seat before the engine stopped, rushing toward him in the pencil skirt and blazer she'd probably thrown on the moment she saw the video. Her natural hair was wrapped in the silk scarf she wore to bed. And her face, God, her face showed every emotion Miles had been trying to hold back. Miles. She breathed, her hands on his face, searching for injuries. Oh my God, baby, are you? I'm fine, he said automatically. Don't you dare. Her voice cracked. Don't you dare tell me you're fine. I saw the video, Miles. The whole world saw the video. He pulled her close, and suddenly his arms were the only things keeping him upright. Aisha was 5'6", of fierce intelligence and righteous anger, but in this moment, she was also the only person who could see past the detective, past the badge, to the man who just had his dignity stripped on camera. They called my badge fake, he whispered into her hair. 17 years, and they called it fake. I know, baby, I know. She pulled back, and he saw the lawyer in her eyes, now sharp and calculating. But we're not letting this go. You hear me? We're not signing anything. We're not accepting any mistaken identity bullshit, and we're sure as hell not staying quiet. Aisha. No, I've spent my entire career fighting this exact thing. I've represented families, I've filed lawsuits, I've stood in front of judges and argued that this system is broken. And now they did it to you. To my husband. To a decorated detective. Her hands were fists now. They're going to wish they'd just apologized. Miles wanted to tell her to be careful, that taking on the department could destroy his career. But looking at her face, he realized she already knew that. She'd counted the cost and decided it was worth it. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about every black person who'd been pulled over for matching a description, every badge that didn't matter when the skin was the wrong color. "What do we do?" he asked. "First, we document everything. Then we call every reporter who's left you a message. Then," she pulled out her phone, "I make some calls of my own." By 6 a.m., Miles's living room had become a war room. Aisha had called in reinforcements. Her law partner, David Kim, sat at the dining table with his laptop compiling every news story and social media post about the incident. Her paralegal Monica was on the phone with reporters screening interview requests. And Aisha herself stood at the window phone pressed to her ear, her voice low and intense. "I don't care if it's early, Senator. My husband was handcuffed by his own department." "Yes, that video?" "Exactly." She listened for a moment. "Good. I'm holding you to that. And Senator, this isn't going away with a press release." Miles sat on the couch watching his wife transform into the warrior he'd fallen in love with in law school. She'd been fighting for civil rights since she was 19, organizing protests, filing complaints, dragging institutions into the light. Now she was fighting for him, and he'd never seen her more focused. David looked up from his laptop. "Miles, you need to see this." Miles crossed to the dining table. David had pulled up a spreadsheet organized, color-coded, methodical. "I've been going through social media cross-referencing with news databases and police records, and I found something. Officer Brian Reynolds. He's been on the force for 18 months, and in that time, he's been involved in 23 traffic stops." "That's not unusual," Miles said. "Patrol officers make stops all the time." "Right. But here's the thing, 19 of those 23 stops were in Beacon Hill and the Back Bay, wealthy neighborhoods. And of those 19 stops, 17 involved black or Latino drivers." David turned the laptop screen. "This isn't random, Miles. This is a pattern." Miles felt something cold settle in his stomach. Have any of those stops resulted in complaints? 3 formal complaints, all dismissed as unsubstantiated. But look at the names. David highlighted them. Marcus Thompson, accountant. Jennifer Williams, doctor. Carlos Mendez, attorney. These aren't criminals. They're professionals who were stopped for matching a description or traffic violations that were never actually cited. Aisha joined them, having finished her call. "So our boy Reynolds has a type." "Looks that way," David confirmed. "And it gets better or worse depending on how you look at it. 2 of these stops involved people who live in those neighborhoods. They weren't even driving through, they were going home. Just like you, Miles." The implications settled over the room like a heavy fog. This wasn't just one bad stop, one mistake. This was systematic, intentional, and Miles had just become the highest-profile victim of something that had been happening for months. "We need to talk to them," Miles said. "The other people he stopped, get their stories." "Already on it," Monica called from across the room. "I've got contact info for 4 of them. Making calls now." Miles's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Detective Crawford, this is Dr. James Chen, Tyler's father. We need to talk. There are things happening in this neighborhood you should know about." He showed the text to Aisha, who nodded. "Go. David and I will keep working here." 20 minutes later, Miles pulled up in front of the Chen residence, a beautiful brownstone just 3 houses down from where he'd been stopped. The irony wasn't lost on him. Dr. Chen answered the door immediately, as if he'd been watching for Miles's arrival. "Detective Crawford, thank you for coming." Chen was in his early 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a firm handshake. "Please come in." The interior was elegant but warm, family photos on the walls. Tyler's academic awards displayed on a bookshelf, the smell of coffee coming from the kitchen. Chen led Miles to a study lined with medical texts and gestured to a comfortable chair. "First, I want to apologize for my son's live stream," Chen began. "I know it's made things complicated for you." "Don't," Miles said firmly. That video might be the only reason I'm sitting in your house instead of fighting charges right now. Your son did the right thing." Chen nodded slowly. "Tyler said you'd say that. He's been following the story all night. Hasn't slept. He's affected by what he witnessed." "Where is he now?" "School. I made him go, thought it would be better than sitting here obsessing over social media." Chen poured 2 cups of coffee from a carafe on his desk. "But that's not why I asked you here. Detective, how long have you lived in this neighborhood?" "About 8 years. My wife and I bought a place when I made detective." "Then you've probably noticed the atmosphere. The way certain residents react when they see people who don't look like they belong here." Chen's fingers made air quotes around the word. Miles took the coffee but didn't drink it. "I've noticed. It's gotten worse in the past year. Much worse. And it's not just uncomfortable looks anymore. It's active." Chen pulled a folder from his desk drawer. 3 months ago, my colleague Dr. Sarah Martinez, she's a cardiologist at Mass General, was stopped while jogging through the neighborhood. Same officer, Reynolds, said she matched a description of someone who'd committed a burglary. Was she cited? No. But she was detained for 40 minutes while they verified her identity. She lives 2 streets over. She was running past her own house. Chen opened the folder. Then there's Professor Marcus Thompson, African American Studies at BU, stopped while walking his dog. Same officer. Miles leaned forward. "How many incidents are we talking about?" "That I know of personally, 7 in the past 6 months. All people of color, all professionals, all stopped by the same small group of officers, with Reynolds being the most active." Chen handed Miles the folder. "I've been documenting them. Dates, times, badge numbers when I could get them. I'm a scientist detective. I believe in data. And the data shows a clear pattern of racial profiling in a neighborhood that's supposed to be progressive and inclusive." Miles flipped through the folder. Chen wasn't kidding. This was meticulous. Incident reports, photos, even some body camera footage that Chen had obtained through public records requests. "Have you taken this to the department?" "Twice. Both times I was told it was being investigated. Both times, nothing happened. The complaints were dismissed as misunderstandings or proper police procedure." Chen's voice hardened. "So when I saw what happened to you last night, a detective, someone with a badge, someone who should have had professional courtesy at minimum, I realized something. If they'll do that to you, what chance do the rest of us have?" Before Miles could respond, the doorbell rang. Chen excused himself, returning a moment later with a young woman in a police uniform. She looked nervous, her eyes darting between Miles and Chen. "Detective Crawford, this is Officer Samantha Davis," Chen said. "She reached out to me this morning after seeing the video." Davis was mid-20s, blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her uniform crisp, but her face showing the strain of sleepless hours. "Detective, I don't know if I should be here, but after what happened to you, I can't stay quiet anymore." Miles stood. "Quiet about what, Officer Davis?" She glanced at Chen, who nodded encouragingly. "There's a group. Cops who, they call themselves the Guardians. They say they're protecting neighborhoods like Beacon Hill and Back Bay from undesirables. They have a group chat, they coordinate their patrols, She swallowed hard. "They share photos of suspicious people who don't belong in certain areas. And detective, almost everyone in those photos is black or brown." The room went very still. "How do you know about this group?" Miles asked carefully. "Because they tried to recruit me 6 months ago. Said I had good instincts after I responded to a call in the Back Bay." Davis's hands were shaking. "I didn't join, but I've seen the messages. Reynolds is in it. So are 4 other officers from our district, and at least 3 from District 2. Names," Miles said. "I need names." Davis pulled out her phone with trembling hands. "I screenshot some of the group chat before I left the conversation. I've been holding on to them, not knowing what to do. But then I saw what they did to you, and I realized this isn't just a few bad cops. This is organized, systematic. She handed Miles her phone. The screenshots showed exactly what she'd described a group chat called The Guardians, with 12 members including Reynolds. The messages were damning. Got another one. Black male, late 30s, driving a newer sedan through Marlborough Street. Gave him the works full-stop field sobriety, the whole nine. He was clean, but bet he thinks twice about coming back here. Nice work. These people need to know we're watching. Saw a suspicious individual jogging on Commonwealth Ave. Stopped and questioned. No ID, claimed to live in the area. Escorted out. Keep up the good work, team. We're making a difference. Miles felt sick. This wasn't just Reynolds. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents. This was a coordinated effort to intimidate and exclude people based on race, all under the guise of community policing. Officer Davis, Miles said slowly, are you willing to go on record with this? She met his eyes and he saw real fear there, but also determination. If it means stopping them, yes. But detective, I need protection. If the Guardians find out I'm talking to you. They won't, Miles promised. Not until we're ready. Doctor Chen, can Officer Davis stay here for now? Of course. Miles's phone rang. Aisha, he answered. I'm at Chen's house. You need to hear this. Miles, turn on the news, any channel, right now. Chen already had the TV on, switching to local news. A blonde anchor sat at the news desk, her expression grave. Developing story out of Boston, where a video showing a black detective being handcuffed by fellow officers has sparked outrage and calls for an investigation. The Boston Police Department held a press conference just moments ago. Let's go live to City Hall. The screen switched to a podium bearing the Boston PD seal. Commissioner Richard Hayes stood at the microphone, flanked by 2 deputy commissioners and a representative from the police union. Hayes was 62, silver-haired, with the kind of face that had smiled through 1,000 press conferences, promising reform and accountability. Good morning. I want to address the incident involving Detective Miles Crawford that occurred last night. After a thorough preliminary review, we've determined that this was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Officer Reynolds was responding to a legitimate call about a suspicious vehicle in the area. Detective Crawford matched the description, and Officer Reynolds followed proper procedure in conducting a traffic stop. Once Detective Crawford's identity was confirmed, he was immediately released. No charges were filed, and we consider this matter resolved. Miles felt his blood pressure spike. Resolved. He called my badge fake. On screen, a reporter shouted a question. Commissioner, the video clearly shows Detective Crawford identifying himself and offering to show his badge. Why was he handcuffed? Hayes's smile never wavered. Officer Reynolds exercised appropriate caution when approaching an unknown vehicle. Detective Crawford was released as soon as the situation was clarified. We train our officers to prioritize safety, and that's exactly what happened here. What about the racial element? Detective Crawford is a black man who was stopped in a predominantly white neighborhood for matching a description. Doesn't that warrant investigation? We take all complaints of racial bias seriously. However, there's no evidence that race played any factor in this traffic stop. This was standard procedure properly executed. Next question. Miles watched the rest of the press conference with growing rage. Hayes deflected every serious question, spun every fact, and by the end, he'd almost made it sound like Reynolds had done Miles a favor by handcuffing him. The final blow came when the union representative stepped to the microphone. The Boston Police Union stands behind Officer Reynolds. He's a dedicated public servant who followed his training and kept himself and the community safe. We will not allow him to be vilified for doing his job correctly. Any attempt to discipline Officer Reynolds for this incident will be met with the full support and resources of this union. The press conference ended. The anchor's face reappeared on screen, already moving to the next story, as if the systematic erosion of civil rights was just another item on the news cycle. Chen turned off the TV. They're protecting him. Of course they are, Davis said quietly. That's what they always do. Miles stood there watching his reflection in the blank TV screen and felt something shift inside him. He'd spent 17 years believing that the system could be fixed from within, that good cops could weed out bad cops, that the truth would always win in the end. But the truth was on video, clear, undeniable, documented, and the system was still choosing to protect its own. "Detective," Davis's voice was uncertain. "What are you going to do?" Miles turned to look at her, this young officer who was risking everything to do the right thing, and then at Dr. Chen, who'd spent months documenting injustice with scientific precision. And he thought about Aisha back at their house, already planning their next move. He thought about all the people who'd been stopped, humiliated, and told it was for their own safety. He thought about Tyler Chen, a 16-year-old kid who'd understood in an instant what it took Miles 17 years to truly see. "I'm going to fight," Miles said. "And I'm not fighting alone anymore." His phone buzzed. A text from Aisha. "Just got off with the FBI Civil Rights Division. They're interested. Very interested. Get home. We have work to do." Miles looked at the message, then at Davis and Chen. The department wanted this resolved, swept under the rug, forgotten by next week's news cycle. But some things once seen couldn't be unseen. Some truths once spoken couldn't be silenced. The video had already been viewed over 1,000,000 times. The Guardian's existence was documented, and Miles Crawford was done being a quiet victim. "Dr. Chen, I'm going to need copies of everything in that folder," he said. "Officer Davis, those screenshots need to be preserved and backed up. Multiple copies, multiple locations." "You're building a case," Chen said. It wasn't a question. "No," Miles replied. "I'm building a firestorm, and the department is going to wish they'd just told the truth." By the time Miles returned home, his living room had transformed into something resembling a newsroom during a breaking story. Aisha had contacted 6 more civil rights attorneys, 3 investigative journalists, and somehow managed to get a former FBI agent on a video call. David's laptop screen showed a sprawling web of connections between the Guardian's members, while Monica fielded calls from national media outlets that were now picking up the story. "Miles." Aisha crossed to him immediately, her eyes blazing with that particular intensity that meant she'd found something big. "Tell me you got what you needed from Chen." He held up a flash drive. Complete documentation of 7 incidents plus Officer Davis's screenshots of the Guardian's group chat. "Aisha, this is bigger than we thought. It's not just Reynolds. It's at least 12 officers coordinating racial profiling across 2 districts." The room went silent. David looked up from his laptop. Monica ended her phone call mid-sentence, and even the FBI agent on the video screen leaned closer. 12. The agent's voice crackled through the speakers. "Detective Crawford, this is Special Agent Jennifer Martinez with the Civil Rights Division. Can you verify that number?" "Yes, ma'am. We have screenshots showing 12 active participants in a group chat called The Guardians. They've been systematically stopping people of color in wealthy neighborhoods under the guise of community policing. We have dates, times, badge numbers, and in some cases, body camera footage." Martinez's expression hardened. "Detective, I need you to listen to me very carefully. What you're describing could constitute a pattern of civil rights violations under Title VI and potentially conspiracy under 18 U.S.C. 241. This is federal territory now. But you need to understand the moment you go public with this, your department will come after you with everything they have." Miles felt Aisha's hand find his. "They already started," he said. "They held a press conference this morning calling it a misunderstanding and backing the officer who stopped me. I saw, which is why you need protection and you need it now. I'm opening a formal investigation as of this moment. Do not, I repeat, do not share those screenshots or that flash drive with anyone except your attorney and my office. If this evidence gets contaminated or leaked prematurely, we lose our case." "Understood," Miles said. "Good. I'll have agents in Boston by tomorrow morning. In the meantime, keep your head down, don't talk to any media, and for God's sake, don't go near that police station." Martinez paused. "Detective Crawford, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen departments close ranks before, but taking down one of their own, especially, someone who just became the face of a national story, they're going to make you wish you'd taken their settlement." The call ended. Miles stood there still holding the flash drive that contained enough evidence to potentially bring down a dozen careers and expose systemic corruption in one of the country's oldest police departments. His phone buzzed Captain Washington calling. "Don't answer it," Aisha said immediately. "I have to. He's still my commanding officer." "Miles." But he'd already picked up. "Captain?" Washington's voice was tight controlled. "My office. 1 hour. Alone." "I don't think that's a good idea right now." "That wasn't a request, Detective. 1 hour, or I'm putting you on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into your conduct during the traffic stop." Miles felt ice spread through his veins. "My conduct? I was the one in handcuffs." "Apparently there are questions about whether you properly identified yourself, whether you resisted Officer Reynolds' instructions, whether your behavior escalated the situation unnecessarily. An internal investigation will clear all that up, unless you'd prefer to come in and discuss this like professionals." It was a threat wrapped in official procedure, and they both knew it. Miles looked at Aisha, who was shaking her head emphatically, then at David, who'd pulled up the department's disciplinary procedures on his laptop. "I'll be there," Miles said. "But Captain, I'm bringing my attorney." "That's your right." Washington hung up. Aisha was already grabbing her briefcase. "We're walking into an ambush." "I know, but if I don't go, they'll use it against me." Detective Crawford refused to cooperate with internal investigation. That's the headline they want. "Then we go prepared." She turned to David. "I need copies of everything, the Chen documentation, the screenshots, every piece of evidence we have. Multiple backups, cloud storage, physical copies, with 3 different people we trust." "On it." An hour later, Miles and Aisha walked into the 3rd District station. The atmosphere had changed since the previous night. Instead of averted eyes and uncomfortable silence, Miles felt open hostility radiating from several officers. Someone had taped a printout of the viral video to the bulletin board with the caption, "Drama Queen of the Month." Miles stopped staring at it. "Keep walking." Aisha murmured, her hand on his arm. "Don't give them the reaction they want." Captain Washington's office was on the 2nd floor, and the walk up the stairs felt like a death march. Officers lined the corridor, some pretending to work, others watching openly. Miles recognized most of them people he'd worked with, trained with, trusted with his life on dangerous calls. Now they looked at him like he was the enemy. Washington's door was open. Inside, the captain sat behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. Deputy Commissioner Robert Carlson occupied one of the visitor chairs, his expensive suit and political smile marking him as the department's official spokesperson to the mayor's office. And standing by the window was someone Miles hadn't expected: Lieutenant Frank Morrison, head of the police union. "Detective Crawford, Mrs. Crawford." Washington's voice was formal, distant. "Please sit." "We'll stand," Aisha said coolly. "This shouldn't take long." Carlson smiled, all practiced charm. "Mrs. Crawford, there's no need for hostility. We're all on the same side here. We want what's best for Detective Crawford and for the department." "Really? Because the press conference this morning suggested you want what's best for Officer Reynolds." "We want the truth," Morrison interjected. His voice carried the rough edges of 30 years on the street and a deep-seated distrust of lawyers. "Which is why we're concerned about the narrative being pushed on social media. That video doesn't show the whole story." Miles felt his jaw tighten. "The video shows me being handcuffed after identifying myself as a police officer. What part of the whole story am I missing?" "The part where you failed to immediately comply with Officer Reynolds' lawful orders," Carlson said smoothly. "The part where you argued with him instead of simply following instructions. The part where your behavior could be interpreted as aggressive or threatening. I asked him to check my badge. That's aggressive. You created a confrontational situation that could have been resolved in 30 seconds if you'd just cooperated. Carlson leaned forward. Detective, we understand you're upset. The optics of the situation are unfortunate. But you're a smart man. You know how these things work. The video goes viral, people get outraged, the media runs with it for a few days, and then everyone moves on. Unless someone keeps feeding the fire. Is that what we're doing? Aisha's voice could have cut glass. Feeding the fire by expecting accountability. We're offering accountability, Washington said, speaking for the first time since they'd entered. Officer Reynolds will undergo additional training on professional courtesy and community relations. He'll be assigned to a different patrol area. And Detective Crawford receives a formal apology from the department. A formal apology? Miles repeated. And my record. The stop that's now in the system. The fact that this will follow me for the rest of my career. The record will note that the incident was resolved without charges and that Detective Crawford was cooperative throughout. Carlson pulled a document from his briefcase. We've also prepared a settlement offer. $50,000 paid discreetly in exchange for dropping any potential lawsuit and signing a non-disclosure agreement. There it was. The real reason for this meeting. They wanted to buy his silence. Aisha laughed, sharp and bitter. You think $50,000 is going to make this go away? My husband was racially profiled by his own department, and you're offering him what amounts to 3 months' salary. Mrs. Crawford, be reasonable. Reasonable. Let me tell you what's reasonable. A full internal investigation into Officer Reynolds' pattern of stops targeting minorities. A review of the Guardians. Oh yes, we know about them and every officer involved in that little hate group. Public transparency, real consequences, and fundamental reform. That's reasonable. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Morrison's face went red. Carlson's smile finally cracked, and Washington's eyes narrowed dangerously. How do you know about the Guardians? Morrison demanded. Does it matter? Miles asked. What matters is that they exist, that they're coordinating racial profiling, that the department knows about them and has done nothing. Those are serious allegations with no proof, Carlson said, but his voice had lost its smooth edge. We have proof. Aisha's words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Screenshots, testimony, documentation of dozens of illegal stops. And we've already shared it with the FBI Civil Rights Division. Washington stood up so fast his chair rolled backward. You did what? We exercised our right as citizens to report civil rights violations to the appropriate federal authorities, Aisha said calmly. Or would you prefer we kept quiet while your officers continue to violate constitutional protections? Morrison was on his feet too. You just declared war on your own department. You understand that the union will defend every single one of those officers. We'll bury you in legal fees. We'll drag your name through the mud. You'll what? Miles's voice was quiet, but it cut through Morrison's bluster like a knife. Threaten me. Intimidate me. Destroy my career for telling the truth. Go ahead. The whole world is watching now. Every move you make, every threat you issue, it all proves our point. Carlson held up his hands. Everyone, please. Let's not say things we can't take back. Detective Crawford, we're not your enemies here. We're trying to help you navigate a difficult situation. But you need to understand the position you're putting yourself in. Going after fellow officers, bringing in federal investigators, that's not how we handle things internally. Internal handling is how we got here, Miles shot back. How many complaints about Reynolds were handled internally and dismissed? How many officers in the Guardians got a slap on the wrist for stops that should have ended their careers? Internal handling means protecting the badge over protecting the people. Washington's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and whatever he saw there made his face go ashen. We're done here. Detective Crawford, you're on administrative leave, effective immediately. Turn in your badge and weapon. Miles felt the words like a physical blow. "You're suspending me." "Pending the outcome of our internal investigation, yes. It's standard procedure when an officer becomes the subject of..." "Standard procedure." Miles's voice rose despite his best efforts. "I was the victim, Marcus. I did nothing wrong, and you're suspending me while Reynolds gets additional training." "The department has to protect its integrity," Carlson said. "You've made allegations that cast doubt on numerous officers. Until those allegations are investigated and cleared, we can't have you carrying a badge and gun." Aisha grabbed Miles's arm before he could respond. "We're leaving. And Captain Washington. You'll be hearing from the FBI. All of you will." They walked out of the office and through the station, Miles acutely aware that he was walking these halls for possibly the last time as a detective. He didn't look at the faces watching them, didn't react to the whispers, or the one officer who spat the word traitor as they passed. Outside in the parking lot, Miles finally let himself feel it. 17 years. 17 years of service, of putting the job first, of believing he was making a difference. And in less than 24 hours, it had all been stripped away. "They took my badge," he said quietly. Aisha pulled him close. "They took a piece of metal. They can't take who you are." But standing there in the parking lot of the station, where he'd spent the better part of 2 decades, Miles wasn't sure about that anymore. The next 3 days were a blur of meetings with FBI agents, interviews with carefully selected reporters, and long nights spent going through evidence with Aisha's legal team. Agent Martinez moved into Boston with a full investigative unit, conducting interviews with every person in Dr. Chen's documentation and several others who came forward after hearing about the case. Tyler Chen's video hit 5 million views, then 10 million. News outlets across the country picked up the story, each adding their own angle. Some focused on Miles's distinguished service record. Others dug into Reynolds's background, finding a social media history littered with concerning posts about protecting neighborhoods from the wrong element. The Guardians became a national conversation about police culture and systemic racism. But with the attention came consequences. Miles's personal phone number somehow leaked, and he received dozens of threatening calls daily. Someone spray-painted "snitch" across his car. His mailbox was stuffed with hate mail, some of it creative in its vitriol, some of it just straightforward death threats. The department offered him police protection, which felt like a sick joke. Worse than the external threats was the internal isolation. Fellow officers who'd been friends for years stopped returning his calls. His partner of 5 years, Detective Rick Sullivan, sent a single text: "I can't be associated with this. Sorry." The thin blue line had been drawn, and Miles found himself on the wrong side of it. On the 4th night after his suspension, Miles sat at his kitchen table at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, scrolling through the latest batch of hate mail. One letter in particular caught his attention, not because of its threats, but because of its return address. It came from inside the department, from an officer he'd trained 6 years ago. "You were my hero," the letter read. "I joined the force because of cops like you. And now you're destroying everything we've built, tearing down good men for doing their jobs. I hope you can live with yourself, because none of us can look at you the same way again. You're not one of us anymore." Miles read it 3 times, then carefully filed it with all the others. Evidence, Aisha kept saying. Document everything. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Detective Crawford, this is Samantha Davis. They're coming for me. They know I talked to you. I need help." Miles was dialing before he'd fully processed the message. Davis picked up on the first ring, her voice tight with panic. "They searched my locker. Said they received an anonymous tip that I had stolen department property. They're claiming I took files, but I didn't. I only took screenshots of my own phone. Detective, they're going to fire me. They're going to make an example of me." "Where are you right now?" "My apartment. But there's a patrol car outside. They're watching me." Miles looked out his own window. Sure enough, there was a patrol car on his street too, parked just close enough to be obvious. The message was clear: "We're watching you." "Officer Davis, listen to me carefully. Call Agent Martinez right now. Tell her what's happening. She can get you protection, real protection. And send her those screenshots if you haven't already." "I already did. But Detective, they're also going after Dr. Chen. He got a notice that his house is being inspected for code violations." Code violations. He's lived there for 15 years without a single problem, and now suddenly the city needs to inspect his property. Miles felt his anger crystallizing into something cold and focused. "They're retaliating against anyone who helped us, making examples." "What do? We do what we've been doing. We tell the truth, we document everything, and we don't back down." Miles paused. "Officer Davis, I know you're scared. I am too. But if we stop now, if we let them intimidate us into silence, then they win. And everyone they hurt in the future, everyone who gets stopped for matching a description, that's on us." There was a long silence. Then Davis said quietly, "I didn't sign up for this." "Neither did I. But here we are." After she hung up, Miles sat in the darkness of his kitchen, thinking about choices and consequences. He could still take the settlement, sign the NDA, take his suspension quietly, and maybe in a few months get his badge back. Go back to being a cop, even if it meant swallowing everything he'd learned about the system he served. Or he could keep fighting. His phone rang. Captain Washington calling from his personal cell at 2:30 a.m. "Don't hang up," Washington said immediately. "Just listen." Miles waited. "I've been a cop for 30 years, Miles. I've seen reform movements come and go. I've watched good cops get chewed up by the system and bad cops get protected by it. And I've spent most of my career telling myself that the best way to change things was from the inside, by being a good example, by promoting good officers, by doing things the right way." Washington's voice was heavy with something that sounded like exhaustion. "But watching what they're doing to you, what they're doing to Davis and Chen, I realize I've been lying to myself. The system doesn't want to be reformed from the inside. It wants to protect itself at any cost." "Marcus, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I found something. In the department archives. Records going back 25 years showing complaints about groups like the Guardians. Different names, same pattern. And every single time the complaints were buried. The officers were protected. The system rolled on." Washington took a breath. "I'm saying I've been complicit in this for decades by staying silent. And I'm done being silent." Miles felt something shift in his chest. "You're risking your career." "I'm risking a pension and a title. You're risking your life. Officer Davis is risking her future. The least I can do is risk my job." A pause. "The FBI is planning a press conference, aren't they? To announce their investigation. Next week. Why?" "Because I want to be there. I want to stand next to you and tell the truth about this department. About what we've allowed to happen, what we've protected, what we've ignored. I have 25 years of evidence, Miles. Names, dates, complaints that were deliberately suppressed. And I'm ready to hand it all over." Miles closed his eyes, feeling the weight of what Washington was offering. A black captain in the Boston PD, one of the highest-ranking minority officers in the department, turning against the system he'd spent 3 decades navigating. It would change everything. "They'll destroy you," Miles said. "They're going to try. But I've watched them destroy better people by keeping quiet. At least this way, I get to go down fighting for something that matters." Washington's voice strengthened. "I should have done this years ago. Should have fought harder, pushed back more. Should have been the captain you deserved instead of the one who told you to take the settlement and move on. I can't change that, but I can stand with you now. Marcus." "I'll see you at the press conference, Detective. And Miles, thank you for being brave enough to do what I should have done a long time ago." The call ended. Miles sat there in his dark kitchen, holding his phone, and for the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something that wasn't anger or fear or exhaustion. He felt hope. His living room light flicked on. Aisha stood in the doorway wrapped in her robe, her eyes sharp despite the late hour. "I heard," she said. "Washington's coming forward, with 25 years of evidence." She crossed to him, taking the seat across the table. "Then we need to be ready. Because when he goes public, when a black captain stands up and confirms everything we've been saying, the department won't just come after you anymore. They'll go nuclear. Every resource, every dirty trick, every weapon they have, they'll use it all." "I know. Your career is over, Miles. You understand that, even if we win, even if the FBI investigation finds everything we think it will, you'll never wear that badge again. The department will make sure of it." He looked at his wife, this fierce warrior, who'd been fighting this battle long before he understood there was a war happening. The badge doesn't matter anymore. It stopped mattering the moment Reynolds put those handcuffs on and called it procedure. Aisha reached across the table, taking his hands. "Then let's finish this. Let's burn it all down and build something better from the ashes." Miles thought about Tyler Chen recording truth on his phone because he understood what adults had forgotten. He thought about Officer Davis risking everything to expose corruption. He thought about Dr. Chen methodically documenting injustice because data doesn't lie. He thought about Captain Washington carrying 25 years of buried evidence and finally finding the courage to bring it into the light. And he thought about all the people who'd been stopped, humiliated, violated, under the protection of a badge that was supposed to mean justice. "Yeah," Miles said. "Let's finish this." Outside, the patrol car still sat on their street watching, but Miles didn't feel afraid anymore. He felt something burning in his chest that was hotter and brighter than fear. He felt ready. The week before the press conference felt like living in a pressure cooker with the heat steadily rising. Miles woke up Tuesday morning to find his front lawn vandalized. Someone had torn up the grass and spray-painted "rat" in letters 3 feet high across what used to be Aisha's carefully maintained garden. The patrol car that had been watching their house was conveniently gone when it happened, reappearing an hour after Miles called it in. No witnesses, no security footage from neighboring houses. "Nothing we can pursue," the responding officer said, not quite meeting Miles's eyes. He was young, maybe 25, and Miles recognized the conflict in his face, a cop who knew this was wrong, but also knew what happened to cops who went against the grain. "Right," Miles said flatly. "Thanks for the thorough investigation." After the officer left, Miles and Aisha stood on their ruined lawn, while neighbors pretended not to stare from behind curtains. Mrs. Patterson, from 2 houses down, who'd brought them cookies when they first moved in, crossed the street rather than walk past them. The Hendersons' teenage son, who Miles had mentored through a rough patch last year, looked away when their eyes met. "We're pariahs," Aisha said quietly. "We're dangerous," Miles corrected. "We're threatening the order of things. People don't know how to handle that." His phone buzzed. Agent Martinez. "Detective Crawford, we need to move the press conference up. Tomorrow 2 p.m. "Tomorrow, that's not a request. We've got credible intel that the department is planning a preemptive strike. They're going to announce their own internal investigation findings tomorrow afternoon, essentially clearing everyone involved and painting you as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. We need to get ahead of it." Miles felt his stomach drop. They're going to try to control the narrative. They're already controlling it. Local news has been running segments about rush to judgment and trial by social media. Someone leaked portions of your personnel file edited to make you look unstable. We need to counter with facts, with evidence, and with people standing beside you who can't be dismissed as biased. Washington's ready. So is Officer Davis. Dr. Chen has agreed to speak about the pattern of harassment in his neighborhood. Good. But detective, you need to understand what you're walking into. The moment you step in front of those cameras, there's no going back. The department will come at you with everything. Your personal life, your cases, Every decision you've ever made, they'll tear it all apart, looking for ammunition." Miles looked at his vandalized lawn, at his wife standing beside him, with her jaw set and fire in her eyes at the house they'd built a life in that now felt like enemy territory. "They already are, Agent Martinez. At this point, the press conference is just making it official." "Then I'll see you tomorrow. And Detective, thank you for not backing down." The call ended. Aisha squeezed his hand. "Tomorrow. Tomorrow," he echoed. By that evening, the retaliation had spread beyond Miles. Dr. Chen called to report that his medical license was being reviewed by the state board following an anonymous complaint about his conduct. Officer Davis was served with a lawsuit from the police union claiming she'd violated department confidentiality rules. Even Tyler Chen wasn't spared. His school received a call questioning whether his live stream constituted cyberbullying and whether disciplinary action was warranted. "They're going after a 16-year-old kid," Aisha said, pacing their living room like a caged tiger. "A kid who did nothing but record what he saw." David looked up from his laptop where he'd been documenting every act of retaliation for the FBI. "It's a pressure campaign. They're trying to isolate you, make everyone too scared to stand with you tomorrow." "It's working," Miles said. He'd just gotten off the phone with Dr. Martinez, who'd had to withdraw from speaking at the press conference. One of the families in Chen's documentation had been visited by Child Protective Services following an anonymous report of neglect. The investigation found nothing, but the message was clear. Monica set down her phone, her face pale. "That's the third person in an hour who's backed out. They're terrified, Miles. These people have jobs, families, futures. The department is making sure they understand what it costs to stand with you." Miles felt the walls closing in. This was what institutional power looked like when threatened, not just fighting back, but systematically destroying anyone who dared to challenge it. He thought about his old partner Rick, who'd sent that text cutting ties. Rick had a daughter starting college, a mortgage, a career. Miles couldn't blame him for choosing survival over solidarity. "So what do we do?" he asked. "Stand up there alone, while everyone who promised to back us up hides in the shadows?" "No." Captain Washington's voice came from the doorway. No one had heard him arrive, but there he stood in civilian clothes, looking older than Miles had ever seen him, but also somehow more solid, more real. "You stand up there with the people who understand that some fights matter more than safety." Washington crossed into the room and set a banker's box on the coffee table. 25 years of complaints, suppressed investigations, disciplinary actions that were overturned by the union, patterns of behavior that were ignored or explained away. It's all here. And tomorrow, I'm handing it to the FBI in front of every camera in Boston. "Marcus, they'll crucify you," Miles said. "They're already sharpening the nails. I got a call from the commissioner an hour ago. He offered me early retirement with full benefits if I'd just sit this one out. When I said no, he told me my pension was being reviewed for irregularities. 30 years of service, and suddenly there are irregularities." Washington's laugh was bitter. "They think they can buy me or scare me. They can't do either anymore." The front door opened again. Officer Samantha Davis walked in, her face set with determination, despite the fear Miles could see in her eyes. "I'm still in. They can sue me, fire me, whatever. But I'm not hiding." Behind her came Dr. Chen, and to Miles's surprise, Tyler was with him. "Before you say anything," Chen said, holding up a hand. "Tyler asked to come, and after what they tried to do to him at school, I think he's earned the right to speak if he wants to." Tyler stepped forward, this 16-year-old kid who'd started all of this with a live stream. "Detective Crawford, I've been getting messages. Thousands of them. People telling me their stories about being stopped, harassed, profiled. People saying they were too scared to speak up because who would believe them against the police? But they believe me. They believe my video. And if I don't show up tomorrow, I'm telling all of them that the system wins when you tell the truth." Miles felt something crack in his chest. Here was this kid barely old enough to drive, understanding what adults 3 times his age refused to see. "Your parents," Miles started. "Support him," Chen said firmly. "My wife and I discussed it. They're trying to silence our son for documenting injustice. If we teach him that standing up for what's right isn't worth the cost, then what kind of parents are we? What kind of people?" Aisha moved to stand beside Miles, her hand finding his. "Then we do this together, all of us. And whatever comes after, we face it together too." That night, Miles couldn't sleep. He stood at his bedroom window looking out at the street where he'd been handcuffed, thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. The department had resources he couldn't match, connections he couldn't compete with, and a narrative machine that had been running for decades. What did he have? A viral video, some screenshots, and a handful of people brave enough or foolish enough to stand with him. "You're spiraling," Aisha said from the bed. "I'm being realistic." "You're catastrophizing." She got up, crossing to stand beside him. "Miles, do you remember what you told me when we first started dating, when I was working on that housing discrimination case and getting death threats? I told you that the truth was louder than fear if you had the courage to speak it. And do you still believe that?" Miles thought about Reynolds's hand on his weapon, about the handcuffs, about sitting in the back of that cruiser while his world collapsed. He thought about 17 years of believing the system could work if good people stayed in it, only to learn that the system was designed to protect itself first and serve justice a distant second. "I believe we have to try," he said finally, "because the alternative is accepting that nothing ever changes." "Then stop catastrophizing and get some sleep. You need to be sharp tomorrow." But sleep didn't come. Instead, Miles spent the dark hours going over his statement, memorizing facts and figures, preparing for questions from reporters who would be looking for any crack in the story, any reason to dismiss this as one man's vendetta rather than evidence of systemic failure. At 5 a.m., his phone lit up with a text from a number he didn't recognize. "Detective Crawford, this is Officer Marcus Jenkins, 3rd District. I can't be there tomorrow. I have a family. But I want you to know you're right, about all of it. Someone had to say it. I'm sorry it has to be you paying the price, but I'm glad someone finally is saying it. Good luck." It was the first message of support he'd gotten from anyone still in the department. Miles read it 3 times, then forwarded it to Agent Martinez with a note. "Not everyone is against us. Some are just too scared. Remember that when this is over." By 1 p.m. the next day, the steps of the federal building were packed with media. Cameras from every major network, reporters from newspapers and online outlets, photographers jostling for position. Miles stood in a back room with Aisha Washington Davis Chen and Tyler listening to Agent Martinez review the plan one final time. "I'll make a brief statement announcing the FBI's formal civil rights investigation into the Boston Police Department. Then Detective Crawford will speak, followed by Captain Washington, Officer Davis, and Dr. Chen. We'll take questions after, but keep your answers focused on facts. Don't get emotional. Don't make accusations you can't back up, and for God's sake, don't give them any sound bites they can twist." Martinez looked at each of them. "Last chance to back out. Once we walk through that door, you're committed." No one moved. "All right then." Martinez straightened her jacket. "Let's go make some history." The roar of camera shutters was like machine gun fire as they stepped onto the platform. Miles had faced down, armed suspects, had testified in murder trials, had given eulogies for fallen officers. None of it prepared him for this, standing in front of the world with everything he'd built burning behind him. Agent Martinez approached the podium, her FBI credentials clearly visible. "Good afternoon. I'm Special Agent Jennifer Martinez with the FBI Civil Rights Division. Following a thorough preliminary investigation, the FBI is announcing a formal civil rights inquiry into the Boston Police Department, specifically examining patterns of discriminatory policing practices in certain neighborhoods. This investigation was triggered by the incident involving Detective Miles Crawford. But our inquiry has revealed evidence suggesting systemic issues that warrant federal oversight." The crowd erupted with questions. Martinez held up a hand. Detective Crawford will now make a statement. Miles stepped to the podium. His hands were steady, his voice clear, even though his heart was pounding hard enough to bruise his ribs. He looked out at the sea of cameras and reporters, and beyond them he could see patrol cars parked at the edge of the crowd, officers watching. The department was here bearing witness to its own reckoning. My name is Detective Miles Crawford. 10 days ago, I was pulled over 3 blocks from my home in Beacon Hill and placed in handcuffs by Officer Brian Reynolds of the Boston Police Department. Officer Reynolds claimed I matched the description of a suspect. When I identified myself as a police officer and offered to show my badge, he told me it was probably fake. I was detained, processed, and released only after my identity was verified. The department initially called this a misunderstanding and considered the matter closed. Miles paused, letting the words settle. But it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was part of a pattern of officers systematically stopping people of color in wealthy neighborhoods under the pretext of community policing. A pattern that has been documented, complained about, and ignored for years. A pattern that involved a coordinated group of officers who called themselves the Guardians and saw their role as keeping certain people out of certain neighborhoods. A reporter shouted a question. Miles ignored it and continued. I have spent 17 years as a police officer. I believed in the badge. I believed in the system. I believed that good cops could make a difference by working within the institution. But I was wrong. The system doesn't want to be fixed from within. It wants to protect itself, even when protection means covering up civil rights violations, intimidating witnesses, and retaliating against anyone who dares to speak truth. He could see Commissioner Hayes in the crowd, now his face red with barely controlled rage. Deputy Commissioner Carlson stood beside him, already typing furiously on his phone. Since coming forward, I have been suspended from duty. My home has been vandalized. My character has been attacked. And I'm not alone. Everyone who has supported me, from fellow officers to civilian witnesses to a 16-year-old kid who simply recorded what he saw, has faced retaliation designed to silence them. But we will not be silenced. Because this isn't about me. This is about every person who has been stopped for matching a description that really just means matching a color. This is about a system that values loyalty over justice and protection over accountability. Miles stepped back from the podium. Captain Washington took his place, and the murmur from the crowd grew louder. A black captain about to testify against his own department was something no one had expected. Washington's voice was grave, weighted with 3 decades of experience. I am Captain Marcus Washington, and I have been a Boston police officer for 30 years. For most of that time, I told myself that I was making a difference by being a role model, by promoting good officers, by handling problems internally. I was wrong. I have this box here. He gestured to the banker's box at his feet, containing 25 years of complaints about discriminatory policing that were buried, investigations that were shut down, and disciplinary actions that were overturned to protect officers who violated the constitutional rights of the people they swore to serve. I am turning all of this evidence over to the FBI today because I finally understand that being complicit through silence is just as damaging as active participation. Washington's eyes found Hayes in the crowd. I have watched good officers get pushed out for questioning the wrong people. I have watched bad officers get promoted because they knew how to play the game. And I have watched this department choose its reputation over the truth again and again. That ends today. Officer Davis was next, her voice shaking slightly but growing stronger with each word. I am Officer Samantha Davis. I was recruited to join the Guardians 6 months ago. They told me I had good instincts, that I understood the importance of protecting neighborhoods from people who didn't belong. I said no, but I didn't report them. I told myself it wasn't my place, that I was too new to make waves. I regret that silence every day. I have screenshots of their group chat showing coordination of stops targeting minorities, sharing photos of suspicious people who were just going about their lives. I have provided all of this to the FBI, and I am here today because staying silent makes me part of the problem, Doctor. Chen spoke about the systematic harassment of minority professionals in his neighborhood, about the families too scared to come forward about the way complaint after complaint had been dismissed as misunderstandings. His voice was steady, clinical, presenting data the way he would present a medical diagnosis. Then Tyler Chen stepped up to the podium, and the crowd went absolutely silent. This kid who'd started everything with a livestream looked impossibly young standing there. But when he spoke, his voice carried. "I'm 16 years old. I've grown up being told that if I just follow the rules, if I just respect authority, if I just stay out of trouble, I'll be fine. But I watched a decorated detective follow every rule, show every respect, and still get handcuffed because of the color of his skin. I recorded it because I knew no one would believe it otherwise. Because I knew the system would protect itself like it always does. And I'm here today because my generation deserves better than inheriting your broken system. We deserve police who protect everyone equally. We deserve justice that doesn't depend on whether your skin matches the neighborhood." The crowd erupted with questions, but Agent Martinez stepped forward. "We'll take questions now, but keep them orderly. Detective Crawford, are you alleging that the entire Boston Police Department is racist?" The question came from a reporter Miles recognized from a conservative outlet. "I'm alleging that the department has systemic problems with accountability and has allowed a culture of discriminatory policing to flourish unchecked. Not every officer is part of the problem, but the institutional structure protects those who are. Captain Washington, aren't you betraying your fellow officers by speaking out?" Washington's jaw tightened. "I'm honoring my oath to serve and protect. The betrayal is what's been done to the community we're supposed to serve." "Officer Davis, you're facing a lawsuit from the police union. Do you regret coming forward?" "I regret not coming forward sooner." The questions kept coming, some hostile, some sympathetic, all of them dissected and analyzed in real time by the assembled media. Commissioner Hayes tried to approach the podium, but Agent Martinez blocked him with a pleasant smile and implacable resolve. "Commissioner, this is a federal press conference. You'll have your opportunity to respond through your own channels." Hayes's voice carried anyway. "This is a witch hunt based on the complaints of a disgruntled employee who's angry about being held accountable for his actions. Detective Crawford has a history of insubordination." "That's a lie," Miles said into the microphone, his voice sharp. "And Captain Washington is facing his own internal investigation for financial irregularities. These people are not credible. We have documentation." Washington cut him off. 25 years of it. Screenshots, body camera footage, testimony from dozens of victims. But please, Commissioner, keep talking. Keep showing everyone exactly what we're fighting against." Hayes looked like he wanted to explode, but Carlson grabbed his arm, pulling him back. They retreated to their patrol cars, engines starting in a coordinated display of departmental unity. One by one, the patrol cars pulled away, leaving the press conference to continue without their presence, a final act of intimidation that looked more like surrender. The press conference lasted another 40 minutes. By the time it ended, Miles felt wrung out, exhausted, but also lighter somehow. The truth was out. All of it. The evidence was with the FBI. And standing beside him were people who'd chosen courage over comfort, justice over security. As they walked back inside the federal building away from the cameras, Aisha pulled Miles into a fierce hug. "You did it. You actually did it." "We did it," he corrected, looking at Washington, Davis, Chen, and Tyler. "All of us." Agent Martinez was already on her phone, but she gave them a nod of approval. "Preliminary response is strong. Social media is exploding. And I just got confirmation the Attorney General wants a full briefing by tomorrow morning. This is going to be big, people. Really big." "What happens now?" Davis asked. "Now." Martinez's smile was grim. "Now the real fight begins. The department will push back hard, but they're playing defense now, and we're setting the terms of engagement. That's a winning position." Miles's phone buzzed with a notification. Tyler's live stream of the press conference had already hit 2 million views. The comments section was a mixture of support and vitriol, But one comment stood out, posted by an account called Officer Jenkins, 3. About damn time someone said it. Not all of us agree with how things are done. Some of us have just been too scared to speak up. Not anymore. More comments started appearing from verified police officer accounts, some supporting Miles, others attacking him, but all of them talking. The conversation that the department had tried so hard to suppress was happening anyway, spreading through the force like wildfire. Miles showed the screen to Washington, who read it and nodded slowly. The silence is breaking. Not everyone. Not even most. But enough. Outside news vans were already setting up for live evening broadcasts. The story would dominate the news cycle for days, maybe weeks. The department would scramble, the union would threaten, the politicians would posture. But the evidence was out there now, documented and undeniable. Miles looked at the people around him. His wife, his captain, a young officer risking everything. A doctor and his teenage son who'd refused to look away. This was what justice looked like when it finally demanded to be heard. Messy, costly, dangerous, but absolutely necessary. So, Aisha said, slipping her hand into his. Ready for what comes next. Miles thought about his suspended badge, his uncertain future, the battles still to come. Then he thought about all the people who'd been stopped, humiliated, violated under the protection of a system that valued order over equity. Yeah, he said, I'm ready. The backlash hit like a hurricane within hours. By the evening news cycle, the police union had organized a counter-press conference featuring 20 officers in uniform standing behind Lieutenant Morrison as he denounced the FBI investigation as a politically motivated attack on law enforcement. Morrison's face was red with righteous indignation as he spoke about officers who put their lives on the line every day being crucified by activists masquerading as investigators. Miles watched it from his living room, Aisha beside him on the couch. On screen, Morrison was in full rhetorical flight. Detective Crawford wants to paint himself as a victim, but let's look at the facts. He argued with a police officer during a routine traffic stop. He escalated a situation that could have been resolved in minutes, and now he's using his race and his badge to destroy the careers of good men who were simply doing their jobs. Morrison leaned into the microphone. The Boston Police Union represents over 2,000 officers, and we will not stand by while a federal agency conducts a witch hunt based on the word of a disgruntled detective and a handful of malcontents. Malcontents? Aisha said, her voice dangerously quiet. He just called a 16-year-old kid who recorded police misconduct a malcontent. Miles's phone had been ringing non-stop since the union's press conference started. Reporters wanting comments, supporters offering encouragement, and a disturbing number of anonymous calls threatening everything from his career to his life. He'd stopped answering after the fifth death threat. David burst through the front door without knocking, his laptop already open. You need to see this. The department's playing dirty. He turned the screen to show a local news website. The headline read, Detective Crawford's troubled past sources say history of complaints and disciplinary issues. The article, citing anonymous department sources, painted Miles as a problem officer who'd been reprimanded multiple times for insubordination and had ongoing conflicts with supervisors. That's complete fabrication, Miles said, reading through the lies masquerading as journalism. I've never been formally disciplined. Never. I know. But they're flooding the zone with this narrative. 3 different outlets have run versions of this story in the past hour, all citing the same mysterious department sources. David scrolled through more headlines. They're trying to destroy your credibility before the FBI investigation gains traction. Aisha was already on her phone. I'm calling Martinez. This is witness tampering and obstruction of... It's politics, Miles interrupted quietly. They can't fight the evidence, so they're fighting me, making this about one supposedly bad cop instead of a broken system. So we let them lie about you. No, we stay focused on the truth and trust that the evidence speaks louder than their spin. Miles stood up, pacing to the window. The patrol car was back parked across the street. A different car, different officers, but the same message: we're watching. His phone rang again. This time it was Agent Martinez. "Don't read the news," she said without preamble. Too late. "Then you know they're coming at you hard. I've already issued a statement clarifying that the FBI investigation is based on documentary evidence, not individual testimony. But detective, you need to prepare yourself. This is going to get uglier before it gets better." Martinez paused. "I also need to tell you that Officer Reynolds has filed a defamation lawsuit against you personally. Claims you've destroyed his reputation and career through false allegations." Miles felt the room tilt slightly. "He's suing me. It's a slap suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation, designed to intimidate you into silence by burying you in legal costs and depositions. We see it all the time. The good news is it won't go anywhere because truth is an absolute defense. The bad news is it'll tie you up for months and cost money you probably don't have." "I'll represent him pro bono," Aisha said, having heard through the speaker. "And I'll countersue for malicious prosecution." "Good," Martinez said. "Because Reynolds isn't alone. 3 other officers named in your testimony have filed similar suits. The union's backing them with unlimited legal funds. They're trying to make standing up so expensive and painful that no one else will dare." After Martinez hung up, Miles stood at the window watching the patrol car, thinking about the mathematics of institutional power. The department had unlimited resources, taxpayer-funded budgets, union war chests, political connections that went back generations. What did he have? A viral video, and people who believed in justice more than job security. "It's not enough," he said aloud. "What's not enough?" Aisha asked. "Us, the evidence, the FBI investigation. It's not enough to overcome institutional inertia. The department will drag this out for years, settle without admitting wrongdoing, and nothing fundamental will change. A few officers might get reprimands. Maybe Reynolds gets quietly transferred. But the Guardians will just rebrand and continue under a different name." "So what are you saying, that we give up?" "I'm saying we need more than exposure. We need leverage." Miles turned from the window. "David, what happens if the Department of Justice gets involved beyond just the Civil Rights Division?" David's fingers were already flying across his keyboard. "If DOJ determines there's a pattern of constitutional violations, they can force a consent decree. Federal oversight of the entire department, hiring, training, discipline, everything. It's what happened in Ferguson and Baltimore, in dozens of cities after high-profile cases." "How do we make that happen?" "You need the investigation to find systemic failure, not just individual bad actors. And you need political pressure, public outcry so loud that DOJ has no choice but to act." Aisha was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "We need more people to come forward. Not just about the Guardians, but about every instance of misconduct that's been buried. We need to show this isn't about one group of officers, it's about a culture that enables and protects them." Miles thought about Officer Jenkins' comment about the silence breaking. What if we created a platform, a way for people, civilians and officers, to anonymously report misconduct without fear of retaliation? "That already exists," David said. "The department has an internal affairs hotline that no one trusts, and a civilian complaint process that gets most complaints dismissed." "Right. But what if we created something independent? A website maybe partnered with a civil rights organization where people could document their experiences. Not filing official complaints, just telling their stories. Building a public record that the department can't bury." Aisha's eyes lit up. "I know someone. The New England Civil Liberties Union has been looking for a way to track police misconduct across the state. If we partnered with them, created a centralized reporting system with legal protection." "It could work," David finished. "Social media amplification, media partnerships to investigate credible reports, and everything documented for the FBI. We turn individual stories into undeniable patterns." Within 48 hours, The website was live. Speak Truth Boston, launched with a simple interface. Share your story, upload evidence if you have it, and choose whether to allow public posting or keep it confidential for investigators. The ACLU provided legal backing and verification processes. Local journalists agreed to investigate reports that showed patterns. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The first day brought 50 stories. By the end of the first week, they had over 300 documented incidents spanning 15 years. Traffic stops that became searches without probable cause. Use of force complaints that were dismissed without investigation. Minority officers reporting discrimination within the department. The patterns were undeniable and damning. Miles spent his days reviewing submissions, his temporary suspension meaning he had nothing but time. Each story was a variation on a theme he now knew too well. A black attorney stopped 5 times in 2 years, always released without citation. A Latino family whose home was raided on a bad tip, then offered no apology when it turned out to be the wrong address. A female officer who reported sexual harassment and found herself assigned to the worst shifts with the least backup. But it wasn't just the stories of misconduct. Officers started coming forward too anonymously at first, then more publicly. Officers who'd witnessed abuse and been told to stay quiet. Officers who'd reported corruption and been frozen out. Officers who'd tried to be the change from within and been systematically pushed out. One submission hit Miles particularly hard. It came from a retired detective named William Harris, who'd left the force 10 years earlier. "I was one of the good ones," Harris wrote. "At least I thought I was. I followed the rules, did my job, and told myself that the bad cops would eventually get weeded out. But I watched the department protect officers who planted evidence. I watched complaints against connected officers disappear. And I watched good cops who spoke up get punished, while bad cops got promoted. I left because I couldn't be part of it anymore. But I should have fought. I should have done what Detective Crawford is doing now. I was a coward, and I'm sorry." The submission included documentation of 3 cases where Harris had witnessed evidence tampering and reported it only to have his complaints dismissed and his own conduct investigated as retaliation. The files he'd kept were meticulous and devastating. Miles called him that night. "Detective Harris, this is Miles Crawford. I know who you are." Harris's voice was older, weathered. "Whole world knows who you are now. I read your submission. And I need to ask, would you be willing to testify? The FBI is building a case, and your testimony about the pattern of protecting misconduct could be crucial." There was a long silence. "I'm 72 years old, Detective. I've got grandkids, a pension I depend on. The department can still come after that pension if they decide I violated some obscure regulation from my time on the force. I know what I'm asking, and I know what it costs." "Do you?" Harris's voice sharpened. "Because from where I'm sitting, you're asking people to sacrifice everything while you play hero. Easy to be brave when you're already a martyr." The words stung because they weren't entirely wrong. "You're right. I didn't choose this fight, it chose me. But now that I'm in it, I can't walk away. Not when I know what I know. Not when I've seen what I've seen." Miles paused. "But I'm not asking you to be a martyr too. If testifying puts you at risk, then just knowing the truth exists is enough. Maybe someday when it's safer." "Someday." Harris laughed bitterly. "That's what I told myself for 30 years. Someday it'll be safe. Someday the culture will change. Someday good cops will outnumber bad ones. But someday never came, Detective. It never comes unless someone makes it come." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I'll testify. I'm saying I'm tired of being a coward. And I'm saying if a decorated detective can risk everything, a retired old man can at least risk his comfort." Harris's voice steadied. "When do you need me?" 3 weeks after the press conference, the FBI's preliminary findings leaked to the press. The Boston Globe ran a front-page story detailing evidence of systematic civil rights violations, with the Guardians at the center, but implicating a broader culture of discriminatory policing. The article cited 47 documented cases of racial profiling, 18 instances of falsified reports, and evidence that supervisors had actively suppressed complaints. Commissioner Hayes resigned the next day, claiming he was retiring to spend time with family. No one believed it. Deputy Commissioner Carlson followed 2 days later. The mayor, sensing political disaster, announced the formation of an independent civilian review board with subpoena power and a mandate to investigate all use of force incidents. But the real earthquake came when the Department of Justice announced it was expanding the investigation beyond the Civil Rights Division. The Attorney General herself appeared at a press conference flanked by the head of the Civil Rights Division and the U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts. The preliminary evidence gathered by our Civil Rights Division indicates a pattern and practice of constitutional violations within the Boston Police Department. The Attorney General said, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. Accordingly, the Department of Justice is initiating a comprehensive pattern or practice investigation under 34 U.S.C. Section 10601. If our investigation confirms these preliminary findings, we will seek a consent decree requiring federal oversight and comprehensive reform of the department. Miles watched the press conference from Dr. Chen's living room, where they'd all gathered: Aisha Washington Davis, Chen Tyler, and a dozen others who'd come forward in the weeks since the initial press conference. When the Attorney General finished speaking, the room erupted in cheers. But Captain Washington remained quiet, his face thoughtful. "This isn't the end," he said when the celebration died down. "This is when the real work begins. Consent decrees can last a decade or more. The department will resist every reform. The union will fight every change. And he gestured to the room, will have to stay vigilant every single day to make sure the reforms actually stick." "You're right," Miles agreed. "But for the first time, we have federal backing. For the first time, change isn't optional, it's mandated." Tyler, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. "Detective Crawford, I've been thinking about something. About what comes next for me." "Yeah. I want to be a cop." The room went silent. Tyler continued, his voice gaining confidence. "I know that sounds crazy after everything we've seen, but someone has to be the next generation. Someone has to be the kind of cop who doesn't need a federal investigation to do the right thing. And I figure, if we're going to reform the system, we need good people willing to join it." Miles looked at this kid who'd live-streamed injustice and sparked a revolution, now talking about joining the very institution they'd been fighting. And he realized Tyler was right. Tearing down the broken system only mattered if you built something better in its place. "Then when you're old enough," Miles said, "I'll write you the best recommendation letter the Academy has ever seen." The consent decree was finalized 6 months later. Federal monitors embedded in the department reviewing every use of force incident, every complaint, every hiring decision. Mandatory bias training for all officers. Body cameras with strict protocols about when they could be turned off. An early warning system to identify problem officers before their misconduct escalated. And a complete overhaul of the complaint process with civilian oversight and transparent investigations. Officer Reynolds resigned before he could be fired, taking a settlement that prohibited him from ever working in law enforcement again. 5 other members of the Guardians were terminated after administrative hearings found sustained evidence of misconduct. 3 more resigned. The rest accepted demotions and strict probationary terms. But the biggest change came from within. The department, under federal pressure and facing a staffing crisis as public trust cratered, created the Professional Standards Division, a new unit tasked with internal accountability and reform implementation. They needed someone to run it. Someone who understood both the culture and the need for change. Someone who had credibility with reform advocates and couldn't be dismissed as an outsider. Captain Washington recommended Miles for the position. "You want me to go back?" Miles asked when Washington called with the offer. "After everything they did to me, they think I'll just come back and help them check boxes for the feds." "I think you have a chance to build something real," Washington replied. "The old guard is gone. Hayes, Carlson, Morrison, all of them retired or forced out. There's new leadership, and they know change isn't optional anymore. But they need people who actually believe in reform, not people who see it as a political inconvenience. I'm not a captain. I don't have the rank for a division head position. That's being fixed. Along with back pay for your suspension reinstatement with full benefits and a formal apology from the department for what happened. It's not enough. Nothing could be enough, but it's a start. Miles talked it over with Aisha for 3 days. She was torn between wanting him to take the vindication and worrying about the toll it would take. You'll be working with people who called you a traitor, she pointed out. People who sent you death threats. People who vandalized our home. I know, but I'll also be working with people like Officer Jenkins, who wanted to speak up but were too scared. People like the rookies coming in who want to do the job right. And maybe, just maybe, I can make sure what happened to me doesn't happen to someone else. Then do it, Aisha said. But we do it together. You need external accountability, someone making sure the department actually follows through. My firm is partnering with the ACLU to monitor compliance with the consent decree. So you'll be inside reforming, and I'll be outside making sure they don't backslide. Miles accepted the position. His first day as head of the Professional Standards Division was surreal, walking into the same building where he'd been suspended now with the authority to investigate the very culture that had tried to destroy him. Some officers wouldn't meet his eyes. Others approached him quietly to say they supported what he was doing. A few openly glared. Officer Samantha Davis became his deputy. She'd been promoted after the FBI investigation vindicated her disclosures, and she brought a young officer's perspective on how to reach the newest generation of cops who'd joined during or after the scandal. We're not going to be popular, Davis said during their first staff meeting. But we're not here to be popular. We're here to make sure the badge means what it's supposed to mean. The work was grueling. Every use of force incident required review. Every complaint demanded investigation. Every hiring decision needed vetting to prevent the Guardians from reforming under a new name. Miles worked 16-hour days, fought with the union over transparency measures, and testified before City Council so many times he lost count. But slowly things changed. Complaint investigations that used to take months were resolved in weeks. Officers with patterns of misconduct actually faced consequences. Training shifted from warrior mentality to guardian mentality. And the demographic makeup of new recruits started to reflect the city they served. 3 years after the press conference that changed everything, Miles stood in the auditorium at the police academy, watching the newest class of recruits graduate. Among them, now 20 years old and looking impossibly young in his dress uniform, was Tyler Chen. The kid who'd live-streamed injustice was now Officer Tyler Chen, badge number 7841, ready to patrol the same streets where Miles had once been handcuffed. After the ceremony, Tyler approached Miles, his family beaming beside him. Detective Crawford, sorry. Deputy Chief Crawford now. Tyler corrected himself with a grin. Miles had been promoted again 6 months earlier, part of the department's continued restructuring. Just Miles is fine. Miles, then. I wanted to say thank you, for everything, for not backing down when it would have been easier, for showing me that the system can change if people are willing to fight for it. Miles looked at this young officer, fresh-faced and idealistic, about to face the realities of police work in a city still healing from institutional betrayal. Tyler, the work isn't done. It won't be done in your career, or maybe even in your lifetime. Every day you'll have to choose between what's easy and what's right. And some days, choosing right will cost you. I know, Tyler said seriously. But someone has to be the change right. Might as well be us. Might as well be us, Miles echoed. Dr. Chen stepped forward, shaking Miles's hand. Thank you for mentoring him, for believing in him. He didn't need much mentoring. Your son knew what justice looked like before I did. Tyler's mother wiped her eyes, pulling Miles into an unexpected hug. You gave us our city back. You gave us hope that things can be better. As the Chen family moved on to celebrate, Aisha appeared at Miles's side, slipping her hand into his. "Proud of yourself?" she asked. "Proud of him? Proud of everyone who didn't give up? Even proud of yourself a little?" Miles thought about the long road from that night in handcuffs to this moment, watching the next generation prepare to do the job right. Yeah, a little. A week later, Miles was driving home from work when he passed through Beacon Hill, taking the same route he'd taken that October night 4 years ago. He slowed as he approached the intersection, where Reynolds had pulled him over, where Tyler had recorded where everything had changed. And there, parked on the corner, was a patrol car. Miles's chest tightened reflexively until he saw the officer inside a young black woman reading a report, just doing her job, existing in this neighborhood without anyone questioning her right to be there. He drove past and she looked up, giving him a casual nod of recognition. Just one cop acknowledging another. Normal. Unremarkable. Exactly as it should be. A few blocks later, Miles spotted another patrol car pulling over a sedan. He slowed, watching carefully. The officer approached with his body camera clearly visible and activated. The driver, a Latino man in his 30s, rolled down his window. The interaction was brief, professional, and ended with the driver receiving a ticket for a broken taillight, an actual violation properly documented without handcuffs or humiliation. It wasn't perfect. The city wasn't perfect. The department still had officers who resented the reforms, who longed for the old days when they could police without scrutiny. But it was better. Measurably, documentably better. Miles's phone buzzed. A text from Officer Davis. "Got another complaint about an officer in District 4 making inappropriate stops. Starting investigation tomorrow. Just wanted you to know the system is working." He smiled, typing back, "Good. Keep me posted." That was the real victory, Miles realized. Not the press conferences or the federal investigation or even his own vindication. The real victory was that complaints were being investigated, that officers were being held accountable, that a young officer like Davis could report misconduct without fear of retaliation, that a kid like Tyler could join the force believing it could be a force for good. When Miles pulled into his driveway, he sat in the car for a moment before going inside. The lawn had been restored, the vandalism long since repaired. His neighbors had slowly, cautiously resumed speaking to him, some apologetic, some still uncomfortable, but at least willing to acknowledge him. Patterson had brought over cookies last week with a note, "I'm sorry we weren't braver. Thank you for being brave for all of us." Inside, Aisha was at the kitchen table, surrounded by legal briefs for the ongoing consent decree monitoring. She looked up when he entered, pushing her reading glasses up into her hair. "Good day?" "Yeah," Miles said, hanging up his jacket. The jacket that now held a deputy chief's badge, earned not through compromise, but through unwavering commitment to justice. Tyler started his first patrol today. Davis caught another complaint that we're actually investigating. The system worked. "The system is working," Aisha corrected. Present tense, ongoing, never finished. Present tense. Miles agreed, kissing the top of her head. Never finished. That night, lying in bed, Miles thought about all the people who'd made this possible. Captain Washington, who'd sacrificed his career to stand with him, and now ran a consulting firm helping other departments implement reforms. Officer Davis, still fighting battles every day to prove that accountability and good policing weren't contradictory. Dr. Chen, whose meticulous documentation had provided the roadmap for systemic change. Tyler, now walking the beat with idealism tempered by awareness. And he thought about the people he'd never meet, the ones who'd been stopped, harassed, humiliated in the years before cell phone cameras and social media made silence impossible. The ones whose complaints had been filed and forgotten, whose truth had been dismissed as lies. The badge on his nightstand caught the moonlight glinting in the darkness. For 17 years, he'd believed the badge represented justice. Then he'd learned it could be wielded as a weapon. And now, finally, he was part of making sure it meant what it was always supposed to mean: His phone lit up with a notification. The Speak Truth Boston website had just received its 1,000th submission. Miles read this latest story in an ever-growing archive of experiences and added it to the queue for investigation. The work was never finished. But for the first time in his career, Miles Crawford believed it was actually possible to get it right. He set down his phone, turned off the light, and fell asleep next to his wife in the home they'd fought to keep in the city. They'd fought to change with the badge he'd fought to redefine sitting on the nightstand, like a promise finally being kept. Justice wasn't punishment. It was transformation. And transformation, Miles had learned, didn't happen in a moment of revelation. It happened in 1,000 small decisions made every day by people who refused to accept that broken systems couldn't be fixed. Outside, Officer Tyler Chen drove past on his first solo patrol, the patrol car's lights painting the streets in red and blue. He saw Miles's house dark, now peaceful. And he thought about the detective who'd shown him that courage wasn't fearlessness, it was doing the right thing despite the fear. Tyler continued his patrol, ready to serve and protect, in the truest sense of those words, carrying forward the legacy of one night, when truth refused to stay silent, and justice demanded to be heard. The city slept, but the work of transformation never rested. And in the morning, they would all wake up and continue building something better from the ashes of what had been burned away. This was the story of how one traffic stop became a reckoning, how one video became a movement, how one detective's courage became a city's transformation. Not because heroes were perfect, but because they were willing to fight even when the cost seemed too high to bear. And in the end, that made all the difference.